is completely unacceptable. Jonsbo totally ripped off Razer and built an eGPU enclosure identical to the Core X.
Not an external GPU.
What do you mean it's not an eGPU?
You can put a whole PC in there.
This is an entire computer case? Holy shit. Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ, and this is the Jonsbo V11, and despite the fact that it's virtually identical to the Razer Core X on the outside, on the inside it holds an entire Mini-ITX PC and costs about $250 less than the GPU enclosure. I actually bought this to possibly use in an upcoming project, but I did build a mid-range gaming PC in it, and I've spent almost 2 weeks with it, so I figured I'd share my thoughts on it. I'll take you through the specs and features, show you what you can and can't fit in the case. I'll take you through my build notes, including the pros and cons. I actually discovered several different variations that affect thermal performance, so we'll look at temps to see what the best configuration is, and we'll finish off with my overall conclusion on the value of the Jonsbo V11. The V11 measures 170 millimeters wide by 353 millimeters deep by 217 millimeters tall for a total volume of 13 liters. By removing a single thumb screw, the entire internal frame slides out of the enclosure. This frame is only compatible with Mini-ITX motherboards and SFX power supplies, and can accommodate CPU tower coolers up to 70 millimeters, graphics cards up to 300 millimeters, 330 if the single 140 front mounted fan is removed, and has a removable tray that can hold two 2.5-inch SSDs. The front I/O includes the power button, a 5 gigabit USB Type A port, a 3.5 millimeter headphone microphone combo jack, and a 5 gigabit USB Type C port. Finally, the case comes with 4 45 millimeter solid metal feet and a 90-degree power adapter, so the case can be oriented either horizontally or vertically. The case comes in silver or black with an MSRP of $139 US, but at the time of filming is available for $118. Let's get into the build notes, and overall building in this case should be a pretty simple process as long as you follow a specific order of operation, which is as follows. Remove the PSU bracket, install the assembled motherboard, install SSDs. I found the best way to do this for cable fitment was to install the drive with the connection to the front of the case and then route the SATA data cable back down and under the drive tray. Next, screw the PSU bracket to the power supply and install the power supply. The PSU fan can be installed either way, but I opted to face the fan to the outside as I'm using a Founders Edition RTX 3060 Ti, which has the blow-through fan directly behind the PSU. Connect the PCIe riser cable to the motherboard and connect and install the graphics card before screwing the riser cable to the chassis. If you secure the riser first, I found the card very difficult to line up and install. Finally, plug everything in. Clean up your cables. A modular power supply definitely helps here, and there are even a couple of tie down points if needed, and carefully slide the system back into the outer case. I say carefully because I did find that because I installed the PSU in the orientation I did, the power cable hit the tab that the frame screws to. I was able to move it enough to install it. However, having the entire frame outside the case made building the system super simple. But what about overall build quality? Well, it's excellent. The outer case is 2.5 millimeter brushed aluminum. It's solid and looks great, and has large 1mm metal mesh windows on each side for lots of airflow. The inner frame is constructed from 2 millimeter thick steel, and all the individual parts of the frames are screwed together, not riveted. The only plastic in the case is the bottom slide rail and front panel grate, which I'll discuss in more detail in a bit. Everything about the case looks and feels premium, including the fact that it comes with a PCIe Gen 4 riser cable. That in itself is at least a $50 value. I do need to add the disclaimer that while I have used the case for about 2 weeks now without any problems, a close look at the quality of the cable itself suggests that if you do buy this case, you should definitely inspect the cable closely and especially ensure none of the solder points are bridged. Some of mine come pretty close, but the first 11 where the power comes in looked fine, so I wasn't overly concerned. Let's talk about the case thermal performance, and I tested the case in both the horizontal and vertical orientation, as well as with the front fan in the stock intake config, as well as with it flipped as an exhaust fan. And I did notice while the front plastic panel piece does have some small slits, it basically blocks most of the airflow from the fan. However, there is a full mesh panel behind it, and it's attached with just 4 screws. So I also tested thermals with and without the plastic panel. And rather than clutter up the screen with a ton of bar graphs, I'm gonna keep it simple with a chart. First things first, the CPU temps are a wash here, as the Ryzen 3700X I used for testing is just on the very edge of what the Noctua NHL9x65 can handle. So even on the open air test bench, the CPU hit its 95° TJ max, but this is an AIDA64 extreme load synthetic test. And you see in all configurations, the CPU did hit 96 degrees with an average temps of around 93 to 93.5 degrees Celsius. So there was some thermal throttling, but only in the load test. I'll talk actual gaming temps in a minute. As far as GPU, the baseline max temp was only 67 Celsius, and we see a 6-degree separation between the best and worst configurations, with the case positioned vertically and the fan as an intake being the worst, and the horizontal case with an unrestricted exhaust fan being the best. You'll notice that the vertical case performed worse on average overall, and this is simple physics. If it's vertical and the fan is blowing air down into the case, this is actually fighting physics. Hot air rises, but now you're blowing it back down into the GPU. If you try to pull the hot air up and out of the case, you're also now pulling the hot air the GPU is trying to exhaust out the back of the card, now on the bottom, back into the case. So the best configuration is to keep the case horizontal, flip the fan into an exhaust configuration. So now you're drawing hot air that the power supply and GPU are exhausting into the case out the front, and the GPU is still able to blow hot air out the back. Removing the front plastic panel will get you another degree. The CPU is not really affected at all by the front fan because it's almost entirely blocked by the power supply and cables. Again, these are absolute worst case scenarios, especially for the CPU. I actually spent several days playing through God of War at 1440p ultimate quality, and after an hour of playing with the case in its default horizontal config, intake fan, front panel installed, both the GPU and CPU peaked in the low to mid 80s, which for a small form factor build like this is great. But I do have to add that the outside of the case also reached close to that 80 degrees Celsius. It was hot. If I was keeping this as my main gaming PC, I'd definitely do some curve optimization to undervolt the 3700X and probably knock 10 or more degrees off of it. Now, along with the restrictive front panel, the other con I see with the case is the front fan is loud. The Noctua cooler and the 3060 Ti FE are super quiet. The system under full load on an open air test bench has a max noise level of just 36.8 dBA, and that's virtually silent in my studio. In the case with the PC just at idle, the noise level jumps to 42.9 dBA. Under load, the front fan contributes almost entirely to a noise level of 53.3 dBA, and if I remove the front panel, it jumps another decibel. So the first upgrade I'd make to this is getting a quiet 140mm fan, probably something like the Noctua NFA14. Finally, while Jonsbo did provide a 90-degree power cable adapter to use, if you're going with a vertical config, you'll also need either a DisplayPort or HDMI 90-degree adapter, as my DisplayPort cable did get squashed under the system. Overall, the Jonsbo V11 is a solid small form factor case. The materials and build quality is better than anything I've seen at this price point. Plenty of room for larger components. A 300mm GPU and a 70mm CPU cooler allow for plenty of high-end hardware options. The inclusion of a Gen 4 PCIe riser cable is great, considering something like the Meshalicious going from a Gen 3 to a Gen 4 riser raises the cost from $99 to $150. But again, be sure to inspect the cable closely. This could be a you get what you pay for scenario, as I only have a test depth of 1 here. The fan is loud and really underwhelming as far as airflow, but at the price of the case, it's not unreasonable to replace the fan. Ultimately, all the pros of the case greatly exceed the few cons, and therefore I think this is one of the best value small form factor cases currently available. For more info on the Jonsbo V11, there are retail links in the description below. If you have any questions, be sure to ask in the comments. While you're there, it'd be great if you click those like and subscribe icons, and I'll see you in the next one.